Assalamualaikum and hi, we are from Group 12. We'll explain and review a decided case, namely in the estate of Chu Kim Kyu, deceased, Chua Keng Giok and others against British Malaya Trustee and Executor Corporation Limited in 1959. Our group consists of 7 members, which includes myself, Izzat Fakhri bin Halimi, Ahmad Naabil bin Muhammad Asri, Ahmad Zuhairi bin Azizan, Dineswary anak perempuan Nadarajah, Muhammad Ilhamie bin Shahrul Anuar, Wan Munirah binti Wan Mustafa, and Wan Nurainun Najwa binti Sulaiman. So, before we begin to review this case, I would like to briefly explain the topic that relates in this case. The topic that relates in our case is about alteration of wills. So, according to the Wills Act of 1959, no alteration, obliteration, or other interlineation made to a will after it has been executed will be valid or have any effect so long as the words or development of the will before the alteration are not prominent. This is, of course, unless the change to the memorandum relates to the change and has been written on the will, which has been executed in a manner that requires a will before it may be implemented. It means that we can change the contents of our will at any moment during our life if we have already written one. It is important to remember that if we wish to change something in the will, we should never try to do it by deleting, omitting, adding, or attaching anything. If the alterations are not appropriately made, the will become ineffective or void.
As for the facts of the case, after the will was initially drafted, the testator expressed a desire to make certain alterations to it. She made the alterations in the will and wrote her initials and the date. But no witness signed or initialed any of the alterations she made to the said will. After the testatrix passed away, the executors presented the will. Even though the testator had made some alterations to the said will, the original language could still be read and understand quite clearly. The issue that has been highlighted in this case is whether the will was operative as originally drawn or as altered by the testatrix. As for the decision of this case, the court held that the alterations made by the testatrix are invalid and thus inoperative. This is because the testatrix's desire to alter the original words had not been clearly manifested in the will. Furthermore, the alterations also had not been signed nor had been initialed by any witness. Thus, by virtue of Section 16 of the Wills Ordinance, the alterations made are invalid. Therefore, the will should be admitted to probate despite the smudged as the legible words are operative. Hence, the court decided in favor of the defendants.
I'll be presenting the ratio decidendi part of this case. The ratio decidendi of this case can be expressed as where the original words in a will were not rendered illegible and subsequently the deletions were not signed and attested by 2 witnesses, then the alterations made in the will were not valid. The facts of this case were dealt under Section 16 of the Wills Ordinance, which provides that no alteration shall have any effect so far as the original words are not legible and the alterations were duly executed by the signature of the testator and attested by 2 witnesses who need not be the same witnesses as in the original execution of the will. This section deemed to be applicable only for naked revocation and does not cover for addition and substitution as in the present case where the testatrix has struck out the name of her adopted son in 3 places while adding her initials beside it.
I will continue for the next slide. It is not unreasonable for the existing provision to deal cases other than for naked revocation, such as in cases of alteration made by the addition and substitution. In this case, the testatrix has failed to carry out a valid alteration in 2 respects, whereby, firstly, she did not render illegible the words no longer desired, and secondly, she did not sign her deletions or have a initialing thereof witnessed. Under Section 15 of the Wills Ordinance, which provides that no will or any part thereof shall be revoked otherwise than by one of the methods specified in the ordinance. Hence, no part of the will in the present case was revoked.
I will continue on our legal opinion. So for the first point, I will highlight the section 16 of the Wills Ordinance. In this case, the court's decision is clear and unequivocal since section 16 seems to impose that the alteration should be executed in the manner as required for the execution of the will. That is to say, the alteration made must be signed by the testator and attested by the witnesses. The effect of section 16 is that alteration made after the execution of the will is invalid unless it is executed like a will. On the other hand, alteration made before the execution of the will is valid provided that it is final. Moving on to our second point, which we provide several ways where a will can be altered. This includes by way of obliteration. The obliteration is usually done by the testator to delete unwanted words in the will. If words are obliterated on the face of the will and no longer apparent, it has the effect of invalidating these words. No longer apparent means if the court can no longer read the words, they are considered properly obliterated. On the other hand, if words are not properly obliterated, then the original words will still be valid and operative. This can be proven from section 16(1)(a) of the Wills Ordinance, where it states that for the purpose of subsection 1, the words or effect of a will are apparent if they can be discovered by any means. So the second way which a will can be altered is through interlineation. Interlineation in a will also can be considered as alteration. This is because an interlineation is an insertion of a new language in between the lines of pre-existing word in the will. This is done usually to clarify a provision or address an afterthought or omission. Similar to obliteration, an interlineation results in the legal alteration of the will. The insertion is traditionally initiated by all parties, or alternatively the will is retyped and then signed. After all, the requirements of the alterations remain that it must be signed by the testator and be attested by the witnesses.
For alteration of wills, generally it can be made only prior to the execution of the will. This is in pari materia to Section 15 of the Wills Act 1959, which explains that any changes made after a will being executed is invalid unless the words changed are no longer visible. In this context, apparent refers to something that is seen in the face of the will itself. So, the test to be applied is whether the original words are visible optically and can still be read by glancing at the will itself. If the words before the change could be read by any natural means, they are deemed obvious and any change would be ineffective. This means that in order to consider the will is valid or not after the amendment made, then we can see the change made and the wording or the change made still can be read by any natural means or not. If it still can be seen, then they are deemed obvious and any change would be ineffective. However, physical interference with the will is not permitted when assessing if the original words are still visible, in which the criteria would not be satisfied if the words could only be discovered by other techniques or extrinsic evidence. The case that we refer to is the Horsford's case, where in this case, the testator had glued a strip of paper over a portion of the will and then scribbled the amended wording on that strip. It was impossible to remove the strip, hence, the court determined that the effect of the instrument or will prior to change would not be obvious unless the strip could be read through. Thus, if the strip was removed forcibly or not naturally and the original words could then be read, the change was considered lawful, and this is deemed bodily interference with the will, which is not permitted. Similarly, we refer to in re-iter, where the application is just the same as the previous case. From this case, the testatrix put a slip of paper over parts of her will to make changes. An infrared photograph of the document was taken, and it was feasible to see what had been written in the first place by viewing the photograph. Therefore, the court held that the amendment was deemed lawful because the words preceding the alteration could not be seen by glancing at the will naturally rather than using the infrared image. This means that the criteria would not be satisfied if the amended wills can only be discovered by any other techniques or extrinsic evidence.
The second means provide that in cases where the words before alteration are still apparent, the alteration could still be valid if it is executed in the same manner as executing a will as provided by Section 5 of the Wills Act 1959, which means this section provides the alteration made in the manner as executing a will shall be deemed to be duly executed if the signature of the testator and the subscription of the witness be made in the margin or some other part of the will or near such alteration. In simple words, the alteration could be valid if it is signed by the testator and attested by two or more witnesses. I'm referring to the case of White Disease, Barker and Weibel and another, where the testator made a valid will leaving the whole of his estate to the plaintiff, their dependents, and a number of other beneficiaries in 1981. Whereby in 1984, the testator made some amendment to the second defendant with the object of altering the will. The second defendant and another witness added their signature to the alteration. However, the testator did not sign the alteration when it was made. The testator's signature was written only on the original will, and then the testator died the following year. In this case, it was held that the alteration was not valid since it was not signed by the testator as formally required for the execution of such alteration. Similarly, Section 15, the second part of Section 15 was applied in the current case, where the testatrix did not sign the alteration, which rendered the alteration of the will invalid. And therefore, in order to execute a valid alteration, it has to be assured that the original words must no longer be altered, or the alteration is executed in the same manner as executing a will. Otherwise, the alteration can never be valid.
So what can we conclude in this case? It is advisable if we want to alter alterations to the will. We should always revise or draft a new one. We should also not be concerned because the new will immediately override the previous one. We should also evaluate our will if there have been any changes that we believe will affect the will, such as if we or anyone specified in the will changes their name, or if the executor we initially chose becomes inappropriate or unfit for the role they have been given, or if the testator passes away. Regularly reviewing our will is in our best interest. That's all from me. Thank you.